Good morning and welcome to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. Today is Tuesday, January 21st, 2025, approximately 10 a.m. And we are here for an allowable ex parte briefing filed by conservation voters of South Carolina. First, I would note for the record that all commissioners are present in the hearing room. Ms. Clausen, would you please go over the ground rules and procedures for this hearing, or not hearing, presentation?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, commissioners, and to all who are present in the hearing room this morning. Today, Tuesday, January 21st, 2025, we are here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for allowable ex parte briefing from the conservation voters of South Carolina. The subject matter to be discussed at the briefing today relates to transmission planning, best practices, and examples of successful transmission planning in other states. This is the same subject matter to be discussed as was noticed on October 3rd, 2024 for this briefing. This is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C. The requirements of that statute are, in part, that the allowable ex parte be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. I ask the presenters, commissioners, and staff to all please refrain from discussing any matters not related to this specific topic. Second, the statute prohibits any presenter, commissioners, or commission staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to any ultimate or penultimate issue which either is or is likely to come before the commission. Third, I would ask that the presenters, commissioners, and staff refrain from referencing any type of report, article, statute, or document of any kind that are not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referenced during the briefing must be provided to ORS for inclusion in the record, which will be certified to the Chief Clerk of the Commission, Ms. Jocelyn Boyd. Fourth, if anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection must be made. And finally, everyone in attendance today in person must sign in and register. Everyone in the hearing room must also read, sign, and return the form which you were given at the door when you came in. It is required by law for each attendee in person to certify that the requirements contained in Section 58-3-260C have been complied with at this presentation. I thank you all for your time and attention. Mr. Chairman, the requested notice for this allowable ex parte communication briefing are in order. Thank you.
Ms. Clausen. Thank you very much. Before we begin, would the parties please introduce themselves, beginning with who's here on behalf of conservation voters?
Yes, sir. Weston Adams with Nelson Mullins Law Firm here in Columbia. And I've got the conservation voters as my client today. Jalen, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jalen Brooks Neffley. I'm an energy project manager with Conservation Voters of South Carolina. I'm happy to be here today.
Welcome to you both. ORS?
And Mr. Chairman, we do have one remote attendee as well. Andy Kowalczyk is tuned in remotely from New Orleans.
Okay.
He's with the Southern Renewable Energy Association.
I see him now.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. ORS?
Good morning, Chair Powers, Vice Chair Williams, and members of the Commission. Donna Rainey, serving as the designee of the Acting Executive Director of Office of Regulatory Staff. And with me is Claire Binge and Stig Rasmussen. We're glad to be here this morning.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else we need to discuss before beginning from anyone?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Clausen, for going over the requirements of this allowable ex parte briefing, but there are a few points that I want to reiterate so everyone's on the same sheet of music. First, this is a briefing and not a hearing. I ask that all presenters refrain from discussing or referencing any confidential information. All communications during this allowable ex parte briefing must be limited to the subject matter that was noticed, transmission planning, best practices and examples of successful transmission planning in other states. Also, participants, commissioners, and staff are asked to refrain from referencing any information outside of the presentation that we have this morning. And lastly, I ask that all attendees carefully read, complete, and return the certified statement form. All completed statements must be provided to ORS in compliance of South Carolina Code annotated section 58.3, 260C. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey. Mr. Adams, you may proceed.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, thank you. My first presenter will be Jalen Brooks Neffley, who, as I said, is with the Conservation Voters of South Carolina. She's a graduate of the College of Charleston and the USC School of Law. She previously worked with the South Carolina Environmental Law Project and the Coastal Conservation League as well. Jalen?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be back at the PSC for another allowable ex parte briefing. As Weston said, I work for Conservation Voters of South Carolina as an energy project manager, and I focus on regulatory work. I'm going to provide just a quick introduction, and then I'll hand things off to Andy. So to start, just want to thank you, commissioners, for your time and attention today. And thank you to PSC staff and ORS for all of your assistance in setting up this briefing. I especially appreciate everyone pivoting to our speaker appearing virtually. I wish we could have this briefing fully in person, but I'm glad that our speaker can still share his expertise despite the winter weather. In the past, CVSC has brought speakers to the PSC to discuss topics like electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and battery storage. Technologies like these create major opportunities for our state in terms of public health, environmental protection, and economic benefits. As an organization that seeks to advance clean air, land, and water for all South Carolinians, we want to ensure decision makers have up-to-date information on these important topics from subject matter experts. Our briefing today, covering transmission planning, is another way to improve South Carolina's electric system and therefore the environment and people's lives. There are always new challenges in the energy space, but these challenges also give us the opportunity to make improvements. Right now, we're facing the challenges of rising energy demand and increasing instances of extreme weather. We're also seeing a changing resource mix as renewable energy and storage become more cost competitive. And we're seeing new grid technologies and more opportunities for individual states to be involved in transmission planning. These changes bring with them major opportunities for growth and improvement. Improving transmission planning has the potential to address the energy challenges heading our way, leverage new technologies, and build a stronger energy system overall. For example, we can build better processes for connecting new projects to the grid, allowing us to efficiently add battery storage and fuel-free resources like solar and wind, projects that are often ready to go but face years-long interconnection queues. By taking advantage of economies of scale throughout our state and region, we can improve reliability in the face of extreme weather, working together to build in redundancies where needed and adding new beneficial technologies at scale to keep our infrastructure up and running. And sometimes, by improving grid planning at the state level and collaborating between regions, we can even reduce the need for expensive new generation by more effectively using what we already have. Creating a more efficient system drives down costs for consumers. The electric grid has always grown and changed, responding to the challenges of the time. South Carolina, too, can consider growing and changing, and transmission planning is one area where we can do that. Our speaker today will show us some ways that transmission planning is used to benefit customers across the Southeast. So I would like to introduce Andy Kowalczyk, Transmission Director for the Southern Renewable Energy Association, or SREA. He's currently located in an unusually cold New Orleans and coming to us virtually. SREA is an industry-led initiative that promotes the responsible use and development of clean energy, energy storage, and transmission solutions in the southeastern states of Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Andy has been involved in energy policy at the local, state, regional, and federal level since 2016, advocating for improvements to energy distribution and utility scale resources. Andy will cover the basics of transmission planning and why it's important, including types of transmission planning, new technologies, multi-value planning, and benefit metrics. His presentation shows how states across the country are using new strategies to improve the grid and achieve better outcomes for ratepayers. Once again, thank you for your time this morning, and I will hand things off to Andy.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Jalen. Thank you to the Commission for having me here today. Thank you for accommodating my remote participation too. Apologies for the change at the last minute, but we have about an inch or two of snow outside my window, so very unusual weather conditions. So I've already had my introduction from Jalen. As she mentioned, we are an industry-led initiative that promotes energy storage, solar energy, wind energy, as well as transmission solutions across those 7 priority states that she mentioned. We are also active participants in the Carolina Transmission Planning Collaborative and the Multi-Valley Strategic Transmission Planning effort that Duke has launched last year, and we are members of the Transmission Advisory Group. We also work frequently with groups that are active on the state level in the Carolinas. So we are aware of things that are happening as far as state policy, as well as what's happening on the regional footprint across the Southeast. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to set the backdrop for this presentation today and just iterate what we're talking about when we're talking about the transmission system. It is the backbone of the American economy. So reliable access to the bulk power system that's provided through this backbone, the transmission system, which connects demand to generation, is crucial for a competitive economy, a modern way of life, and the public health and safety of citizens across the country. But planning this system is crucial to consider what the needs are for the system. And planning near-term and long-term is important. Planning for local and regional needs is also crucially important in transmission planning. And that's what I'm here to talk about. Next slide, please. So in today's presentation, I'll be talking about the following topics: types of transmission planning, grid enhancing technologies, multi-value transmission planning, local strategic multi-value planning, as well as benefit metrics. Next slide, please. So I'll start off this presentation by talking about types of transmission planning. Next slide, please. So there's really, when you're looking at transmission planning in a broad sense, there's 2 main categories. So there's local planning and regional planning. Local planning typically is what is encompassed in planning for a single balancing authority, like Duke Energy, South Carolina. The Carolinas Transmission Planning Collaborative focuses on these local needs mostly. And then regional planning, you're looking at planning across multiple balancing authorities and how you can leverage economies of scale, as well as plan for mutual benefits across multiple balancing authorities. And this is what is discussed in FERC Order 1000, as well as Order 1920, which was issued last year in May. Next slide, please. So drilling down into what this means a little bit further, local planning is focusing on local reliability needs within a single balancing authority. It typically is looking at timescales of 2 to 5 to 10 years out into the future when you're assessing what the needs are. Some common examples are interconnection of new generation resources, interconnection of new load resources like data centers. And then when you're considering what the reliability needs are, you're considering the very baseline and core reliability needs that are that you need to plan for to ensure that there's reliable service and reliable delivery of power to demand. And these are what you call the NERC reliability standards. And then there's asset replacement and line rebuilds. When you have assets that are coming to the end of their useful life, you want to replace them, and you want to do that in a strategic way. And then there's regional planning. Regional planning is looking at regional reliability needs. It's looking at timescales 10 to 20 to 40 years into the future. A lot of this time scale, and you'll see this with interregional planning too, is further out into the future because a lot of these solutions are larger in terms of voltage as well as size. And it's more helpful to look further out in the future because they can take a while to construct. Some common examples of regional reliability planning can include economic planning. So this is looking at narrow economic needs and economic benefits in planning. And then there's multi-value strategic planning, which is looking at economic and reliability benefits over time. And then asset replacement and line rebuilds can happen within this context, as well as baseline reliability. And I didn't add in that bullet point, but basically all of these different types of planning have to include baseline reliability planning within them and being able to comply with NERC standards. But there is the addition of economic and multi-value planning. And then finally, interregional. Economic and multi-value planning is a part of interregional planning as well, and planning for the mutual benefit of multiple regions and the reliability benefits as well. But we're seeing a recent, there's a new paradigm out there in interconnection related planning. MISO and the Southwest Power Pool. MISO is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, where SREA works as well. They recently approved the Joint Targeted Interconnection Queue study, which addresses interconnection needs across the seam from either one of the footprints and focuses on lowering the cost of interconnection of new resources. So that is a new kind of paradigm in interregional planning. Next slide, please. So whether you're planning for local or regional or interregional needs, the focus should always be on cost efficiency and reliability. And that is because costs are rising in the industry due to aging infrastructure, increasing demands, and a diversity of demands being placed on the bulk electricity system and transmission infrastructure. And reliability standards and resilience needs are evolving. Basically, the short-term planning for long-term needs has proven expensive in the 21st century, and short-term planning and local planning has been the dominant paradigm in transmission planning across the country. But weather is testing the limits of this paradigm, and demand from new industry like data centers and just economic development booms that we're seeing in recent years is presenting new challenges to this locally planned, short-term planned infrastructure. And this begs the need for new approaches to planning, which are increasingly being discussed by industry and regulators. So multi-value planning is becoming more and more prominent in regional transmission organizations, as well as non-RTO areas like the Duke footprint, where we're seeing the multi-value strategic transmission planning effort. And there's, of course, FERC Order 1922, which is focused on long-term planning and multi-value planning and multi-benefit planning too. Next slide, please. And here's just an indication of this, this struggle with cost competitiveness that comes from local transmission planning. This is a slide that comes from the consulting group Brattle, but is the original original source is from Edison Electric Institute, which is the trade group for investor-owned utilities. And the data is coming from FERC Form 1 submissions from these utilities. This is detailing yearly transmission investments. Again, this is predominantly local transmission investments. And while the Southeast isn't disaggregated in this slide, it does indicate a significant uptick in transmission spending over the last decade, especially. Next slide, please. And finally, in this section, I wanted to mention grid enhancing technologies. Grid enhancing technologies, or GETs for short, are often overlooked in the transmission planning process. And that is something that is unfortunate, because grid enhancing technologies can be implemented within many months, whereas transmission investments can take quite a while to build. You need to be targeted in how you utilize GETs, because they are a solution that's more short-term, but there are significant benefits associated with GETs. And I just wanted to read this quote from former FERC Chair Neil Chatterjee. He says here that separate studies by leading engineering firms Quanta Technologies and the Brattle Group found that GETs in generator interconnection could reduce wholesale energy costs nationwide by over $5 billion per year. And when you lower interconnection costs, you lower the capital costs of new generation too. So that's a very important input into saving money on long-term planning, is that you could relieve some of the short-term stress as well on the grid. And then there's the three main technologies: advanced power flow control, dynamic line ratings, and topology reconfiguration, that comprise the grid enhancing technologies. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go back to this topic of multi-value planning and go into it in a little bit more depth. Next slide, please. So multi-value planning has these three major components. So when you're looking at needs for the transmission system, multi-value planning takes this approach of scenario-based planning. And this is something that has been employed by Royal Dutch Shell and a lot of the big oil and gas super majors, because they often make very large capital investments, and these are large infrastructure investments that may take a while to construct. But basically, for the last century, Royal Dutch Shell has used scenario-based planning to identify needs for their investments and needs for their system by looking at projections of how the energy system is going to change, how economic cases are defined in the future, and how things will change in the future world over a long time horizon. And this is something that's true of multi-value transmission planning as well. You look at time frames 20 to 40 years out in the future. You see how the generation mix is going to change, how retirements are going to change your energy system, as well as the demands that will be placed on that system. And then you consider what the needs are for the transmission system and how that transmission system needs to be planned to meet those needs. So this time horizon, like I had said, is further out into the future. This is helpful for quantifying the benefits over the useful life of a transmission asset, because the useful life of a transmission asset is on average about 50 to 60 years into the future. I will add that for locally planned transmission, there is no assessment of benefits typically, and that is a difficulty when you're looking at the lifespan of these assets and what kind of benefits that they can provide over their useful life. And it also provides a buffer for projects that may take 10 to 12 years to construct and have in commercial operation, is to have a longer time span where you're considering what the forecasted energy system is going to look like, what the needs and what the benefits are going to be of this infrastructure. And then the last attribute for multi-value planning that I wanted to talk about, and I'll talk about later in this slide deck, is the assessment of multiple benefits. And the idea behind this is that you're looking at the benefits and beneficiaries over time and how those benefits accrue as the energy mix changes and those needs evolve many years into the future. And this is helpful for decision makers to ensure that they're looking at a more fulsome picture of the value of long-term transmission investments, and they're making prudent decisions for ratepayers. So next slide, please. And this is an illustration of what it looks like for the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO. Here you have long-term regional planning at the top. This is a 20-year time horizon effort. Then you have market efficiency planning. This is your economic planning type. Local reliability planning, which is more short-term, and you're looking at the core reliability needs of the system alone. And then there's generator interconnection planning. And then below all of this, I just wanted to show and note that there is these inputs that go into the long-term scenarios. So there's the generator interconnection queue and projects that have cleared the queue that are very certain to be built in the next 5 years maybe. And then there's the organization of MISO states, which is a representation of all the different state commissions throughout MISO's footprint. And they take a survey where they talk about what they're seeing on their state level about the generation changes based on resource plans, integrated resource plans, and other goals, public policy goals maybe, that will change the energy system. And then you have the member resource plans, whether they're corporate goals from the investor-owned utilities or they are other relevant corporate goals throughout MISO's system. And then their regional resource assessment is just kind of a roll-up of all these inputs to assess what the low case of development and scenarios is going to look like, what the middle case is maybe going to look like, and then what the most advanced case of maybe electrification, retirements of resources, as well as build out of new kinds of technologies. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like when you literally have it all on a map. So this is MISO's long-range transmission plan, tranche 1, as they call it, which is tranche is just another name for phase 1. This was approved back in 2022, and this caption is from their reliability assessment of the portfolio, and it's in really small letters, but all these arrows pointing to different parts of the grid and the different states is indicating that it's solving a reliability need. Things like very core needs for the system, like maintaining thermal stability and not having thermal overheating of the lines that result in power outages, as well as maintaining regional stability, voltage stability for the system while you're moving around power in the system that evolves over the next 20 years. This is very important to ensure that there's regional reliability and make sure that when you're moving the power around, it's not throwing off the frequency of the grid and causing power outages. But I also want to note that this helps mitigate the pressure of the local transmission planning. So you're able to displace some of those local transmission projects over the 20-year time horizon. And it also facilitates consumer savings and multiple benefits. So this kind of gets to the multiple benefit multi-value planning. Next slide, please. So I want to look at a newer paradigm of multi-value planning, and that is local strategic multi-value planning. Next slide, please. So this is a new approach and a novel approach from Duke Energy that they are engaging with stakeholders on a multi-value strategic planning effort that was launched last year. They're looking at assessing transmission needs 10 years into the future on more of a local level. But it's very important because it fills a gap in reliability planning where they're looking at addressing the growing portfolio of renewable energy resources over the next 10 years in their footprint, and also looking at the benefits, like multiple benefits of planning this way. It is also scenario driven, capturing the Duke Integrated Resource Plan, as well as other probable outcomes that can impact transmission needs provided through stakeholder input. And then it's focused on solutions that, just taking a couple of things that are common benefit metrics, lowering energy production costs, energy losses, as well as providing customer savings and reliability benefits across many benefit metrics. Next slide, please. And this is just the Duke process timeline where you're looking at a multitude of different milestones that are part of their process. And this is part of the stakeholder process where they're engaging stakeholders. They're seeking feedback from stakeholders that have a diversity of viewpoints and a diversity of expertise that they can provide into this process. The first part is looking at ground truthing things, asking stakeholders what they think are the most cogent scenarios to be considering for this process to develop what the needs are for the system, and then finally identifies transmission solutions that will be the output of this whole multi-value strategic transmission planning process. So the first part is an assessment, identifying assumptions and inputs. And then the next part is identifying the needs that come out of the assessments and inputs. And then finally is identifying solutions. And then at the end of this as well, there is an assessment of any alternatives that are provided by stakeholders to the solutions that were provided, seeking to, again, identify more cost-efficient or technically feasible solutions. Next slide, please. And from SREA's perspective, there are a lot of great reasons why Duke is engaging in this process. Increased demand, as Jalen mentioned earlier, there are greater demands being placed on the transmission system with new technologies and the growth of data centers and AI seeking to connect to the grid. Duke had forecasted originally back in 2023 about a 3% growth in commercial sales and load, and now they're looking at a 10% total commercial sales growth in 2028. In North Carolina, the adoption of electric vehicles surpassed 80,000 in 2023, and it continues to climb pretty steeply. Extreme weather. So Winter Storm Elliott tested the capacity of the grid in the Southeast, and longer distance and higher voltage lines can increase the ability to move power from a diversity of supply options to a diversity of supply demand needs. And it can importantly save consumer costs by being able to tap into a multitude of different resources that may have maybe have lower production costs during these sorts of events. And most importantly, it serves the most crucial need for the electricity system, and that is to keep the lights on for everybody. And then finally, I'll talk about enabling generation. So Duke launched the Red Zone Expansion Plan to address the cost of interconnection needs in their region. It was addressing recurring constraints on the system that were leading to very high interconnection costs that basically caused a lot of interconnection customers or participants in that interconnection queue to just drop out of the queue and not be able to develop projects at a much higher capital cost. And that was really positive to engage in that red zone expansion plan to identify solutions to lower those interconnection costs. But multi-value strategic transmission planning is really needed to ensure that there is reliable delivery of these resources and that you're able to tap into a diversity of generation resources to balance the system as well. Next slide, please. And then I wanted to just highlight some the commission statements on multi-value strategic transmission planning. And I wanted to uplift that the commission has expressed support for multi-value planning and grid enhancing technology, which is very much in line with how much of the industry is considering transmission planning for those drivers that I just mentioned on the last slide. Next slide, please. Finally, I want to wrap up our this presentation today talking about benefits in a lot deeper of a way. You could probably do an entire presentation or a couple of presentations just on benefits, methodologies behind calculating them, and the different types of benefits that are commonly used out there when you're talking about benefit metrics to assess the value of transmission. I won't do that today, but I did want to go at least maybe like the 101 version on these next couple of slides of why benefits assessment is important with transmission planning. Next slide. So benefit tracking is basically important for transmission investments because it's important to look at a more fulsome picture of what the value of transmission is over its lengthy lifespan of 50 to 60 years into the future. Transmission is a unique asset because it's what connects production to demand. It's like a road system more than it is like a power generation resource, but it is an asset that's being constructed and you're asking for ratepayer dollars for. So it's important to consider what the benefit to consumers is. There are a host of benefits to track for transmission investments and many that are used in the industry. And I'll get to those on subsequent slides, but I just want to mention that in the regional transmission organizations that we cover for SREA, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator and the Southwest Power Pool, they both require that transmission investments that are looking this far out into the future at least pay for themselves, that there's a 1-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. MISO looks at a 20-year period when they're assessing the benefits of these investments. SPP looks a little bit further out in the future. They look at the benefits over a 40-year period. And oftentimes, when they do the assessment of benefits based on the forecast that comes from the scenarios and from the build out that they've identified in their portfolio projects, the business case for the multi-value projects that MISO originally built over the last decade and were identified in their transmission plan that spanned from 2009 to 2011, they reached a 3-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. So for every dollar that a consumer spends, they receive $3 in benefit back. The later efforts, LRTP Tranche 1, which I had shown the map of earlier, that has a 2.6 to 4.5 times over benefit to cost ratio. And their most recent effort, LRTP Tranche 2.1, which was approved back in December, has a benefit to cost ratio of 1.8 to 3.5 times over. And SPP's latest report on their value of transmission study back in 2021 saw a 5.24 to 1 benefit to cost ratio for their portfolio. Next slide, please. And I wanted to I'm not going to go through all these because I've already talked about SPP's balanced portfolio and LRTP tranche 1 and 2. But I wanted to point out that Texas was one of the first footprints over in ERCOT to launch this sort of long-term planning. This was focused more on enabling new generation than multi-value benefits. But that is not to say that transmission doesn't have a multitude of benefits if it's being planned for a new generation. It's just more focused on one element of benefits, and that would be enabling new generation. Their purpose was to enable about 18 gigawatts of wind. The outcome was that it enabled 21 gigawatts of wind, but it also provided consumers with significant benefits with enabling this lower cost generation. An estimated $370 million a year in savings for consumers, as well as facilitating about $5 billion in economic activity. And I wanted to point out that for MISO's multi-value projects that were built over the last decade, when there was Winter Storm Uri that impacted the MISO footprint, as well as the Southwest Power Pool footprint, as well as the Southeast and the MISO South footprint, where I'm in right now. There were significant resilience benefits during Winter Storm Uri. They were able to not only flow about 10 gigawatts of power from the PJM footprint next to MISO, just east of MISO, to the Southwest Power Pool footprint. They were also able to keep the lights on for their consumers and lower costs of energy during a peak event with the usage of these big backbone multi-value projects in their northern footprint. Next slide, please. So just a broad kind of statement on benefits and voltage correlation. If planned well, and that's key to plan things strategically and plan them well, longer distance and higher voltage transmission can generally provide the following benefits. And folks may be aware of this, but it's just a fact of physics that when you increase the voltage of transmission lines, there are lower losses over time, over the time scales that the useful life of transmission investments represent, 50 to 60 years. That can result in consumer savings through avoided capacity build-out, as well as just lower production costs of energy because you're able to transport more energy and you're not losing as much through line losses. As well as just providing this electricity highway when you increase the native voltage of the system. Native voltage is basically when you're talking about what is the most dominant, highest voltage lines that are in your system that's moving power around. It could be 230 kV, it could be 345 kV or 500 kV, even higher. But when you're providing this electricity highway, it's really helpful for extreme peaks that require power to be provided across the system to maintain stability and avoid thermal overloading, as well as being able to tap into a multitude of different resources. So it's important, just like the highway system is, getting things where they're produced to where they're demanded. And then providing headroom on the system. Having a little bit of slack in the system and a little bit of redundancy is important so that you're able to meet needs into the future. Things like the data center explosion the system can absorb impacts like that at a lower cost, and there's less of that local planning, as well as changes in generation types. You can absorb that impact and defer a little bit of that interconnection cost. So it's important to have a strong backbone for the transmission system so that it's able to absorb the future shock. Next slide, please. And this is just an illustration this is a really small lettering, and I didn't plan to go through all these different benefit metrics. This is the multitude of benefit metrics that MISO used for their LRTP Tranche 1 effort. This is just showing that there's a diversity of different benefits that are being considered that manifest themselves in their analysis when they're looking 20 years out in the future. They also provide a higher bookend for this, even though their scenarios look out 20 years into the future. They provide numbers 40 years into the future based on their analysis. But basically, the scenario that they're looking at, they kind of lock in when they're looking 20 to 40 years out, the generation mix at year 20. But this is just what it looks like when they are finished with their business case for these transmission lines, and they've identified what the net savings to consumers are going to be. Next slide, please. And I wanted to just provide this comparison. I didn't put Southwest Power Pool in here, but I wanted to just show the similarities between what's happening in a non-market area as well as a market area, and that these benefit metrics are widely used throughout the industry, and it's a positive thing to be seeing that Duke is adopting many of these industry-respected benefit metrics when they're considering the value of their multi-value strategic transmission planning effort. Again, they're only looking 10 years out into the future, and this is a more locally centered effort, but it is a very positive thing that they're utilizing these benefit metrics, because regardless of the scale, the local or regional scale, these transmission assets will be having a useful life of about 50, 60 years into the future. And it's a very positive thing that they're looking at all the relevant benefits to their transmission investments to ensure that they are planning a portfolio that will result in consumer savings and have value. And that is the entirety of my slides. So I'm free for questions. And thank you again for the opportunity to present to all of you today.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to try to pronounce either one of the names of our witnesses. I've been sitting here staring at them, and I give up. Thank you. I'll just say thank you, Mr. Adams, for
Kowalczyk and Nefli, and that's I had to learn that yesterday.
yeah. Are there any commissioner questions or comments at this time? Commissioner Williams?
Thank you. I just have a comment. I often like to ask questions as I go along. This was a good example of where questions are answered as presented. So thank you for the thoroughness and answering my questions without even having to ask them.
I think we all reflect and agree with those remarks, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Mr. Chairman, I have
Mr. Belson.
one question for Mr. Kowalczyk. Mr. Kowalczyk, and I started to jump in when you were talking about it, but when you were talking about the reviews with the balancing areas, the multi-view or regional planning, take you back there. I think it's about on slide 7 or so. And you may not even need to look at it, but you used a term, I just wanted to clarify. You said across the seam. Is that, when you use the word seam there, are you referring to like the area, the balancing areas, the boundaries? Because, you know, there's this seam program that some of the utilities in South Carolina and North Carolina have, and I just want to make sure you're not referring to that program. I think you're using the term SEAM, like the seam on a baseball or the seam of the,
That's right.
Not SEEM, which is an acronym. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, indeed I am. And seams are so it's not so much between balancing authorities. Seams, I was referring to interregional planning. So interregional planning is typically when you're looking at groupings of balancing authorities that constitute a region, and planning between multiple regions.
Okay.
And typically they say it's a seam, it's SEAM. As I mentioned, it constitutes the boundaries between the different markets, basically, but not SEEM.
All right. I just wanted to, I thought that in the context, but I really just wanted to make sure, and I appreciate you clarifying for me. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Belser. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. Be careful out there. I think we got some weather coming our way, and hope everyone has a very good day and peaceful night. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.